The courtroom fell silent as the sound of the slap echoed through the marble halls. Jamila Richardson stood frozen, her cheek burning with the sting of humiliation and rage. It was 2023, yet here she was, a successful corporate lawyer, being physically assaulted by a senior prosecutor in full view of everyone, and no one seemed willing to intervene. Marcus Holloway, the arrogant prosecutor who had just struck her, sneered with a confidence born of years of systemic privilege. His hand was still raised, the threat hanging in the air like a poisonous cloud. Jamila felt the eyes of her colleagues, the court staff, and the judge boring into her, some with shock, others with a mixture of pity and resignation. But Jamila Richardson was not a woman to be silenced. Her mind raced back to her grandmother's stories, tales of resilience, of fighting against impossible odds, of standing up when the world tried to push her down. She came from a lineage of black women who had faced unimaginable challenges, who had turned pain into power. The courtroom had gone deadly quiet. The judge, an older white man with tired eyes, seemed momentarily frozen, unsure how to process the brazen assault that had just occurred. Marcus Holloway's reputation as the aggressive prosecutor was well known, but this was a line that should never have been crossed. Jamila's hand touched her cheek, not in weakness, but in a gesture of defiance. Her eyes locked with Marcus's, burning with an intensity that made the cocky prosecutor take an involuntary step back. This was more than a personal attack. This was a moment that would define her entire career, her dignity, and the fight for justice. She knew the risks. As a black woman in a predominantly white male-dominated legal system, speaking out could cost her everything. Her reputation, her cases, her future, all could be destroyed in an instant. But something inside her had fundamentally shifted in that moment of violation. The case they were arguing was complex, a civil rights lawsuit against a major corporation for systemic discrimination. Jamila had spent months preparing, gathering evidence, building an airtight argument that threatened powerful interests. And now this physical assault seemed like a desperate attempt to intimidate her, to break her spirit. But they had chosen the wrong woman to mess with. As the initial shock began to wear off, Jamila could feel a fire building inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every black woman who had been silenced, marginalized, and disrespected in professional spaces. This was about challenging a system that allowed such blatant disrespect to exist. She took a deep breath, straightened her tailored blazer, and waited for the first response. The courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. Jamila Richardson was about to fight back, and she was going to make sure the world watched. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and media attention. Jamila had immediately filed a formal complaint, her documented evidence and witness statements creating a paper trail that would be impossible to ignore. Her law firm, initially hesitant, found themselves thrust into a spotlight they never anticipated. Video footage from the courtroom quickly went viral. Social media erupted with support and outrage, with hashtags demanding justice trending nationwide. Civil rights organizations reached out, offering support and legal counsel. Jamila became more than just a lawyer. She became a symbol of resistance against systemic workplace violence. Marcus Holloway, meanwhile, found himself rapidly becoming a pariah. The prosecutor's office, desperate to manage the public relations nightmare, placed him on immediate administrative leave. His decades of aggressive tactics and unchecked behavior were suddenly under intense scrutiny. Jamila's personal history became a crucial part of her strength. Raised by a single mother who was a civil rights activist, she had grown up understanding that every battle was bigger than the individual. Her mother had always told her, "Change doesn't come from staying silent. Change comes from standing up, even when your voice shakes." Her legal team began preparing a multi-pronged approach. This wasn't just about a single act of physical assault. This was about challenging a deeply entrenched culture of disrespect and discrimination. They would use this incident to expose systemic issues within the judicial system, turning a moment of personal violation into a broader fight for justice. Psychological evaluations and workplace conduct reports were subpoenaed. Jamila discovered she wasn't Marcus's first victim, just the first one willing to fight back publicly. Other women, previously silenced by fear and professional repercussions, began to come forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The civil rights lawsuit she had been presenting when the assault occurred took on new significance. What was once a complex legal battle now became a powerful narrative about institutional racism and gender discrimination. Her professional brilliance, combined with her newfound role as a symbol of resistance, made her arguments even more compelling. News networks began featuring her story. Interviews revealed not just the incident but Jamila's entire journey, her struggles, her achievements, her unwavering commitment to justice. She refused to be portrayed as a victim, instead positioning herself as a catalyst for systemic change. Her colleagues watched in a mixture of admiration and apprehension. The legal community was being forced to confront uncomfortable truths about its own culture. Jamila wasn't just fighting a personal battle, she was challenging an entire system. As the weeks progressed, the momentum of her fight continued to build. What Marcus Holloway had intended as a moment of intimidation had transformed into a movement. Jamila Richardson was proving that one voice, when raised with conviction, could create seismic shifts in institutional behavior. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, Jamila felt the winds of change truly beginning to blow. Courtroom became a battlefield of legal strategy and moral reckoning. Jamila's lawsuit against Marcus Holloway and the prosecutor's office was meticulously crafted, drawing upon years of documented misconduct and systemic bias. Her legal team assembled a compelling case that went far beyond the single act of violence. Expert witnesses were brought in, psychologists who could testify about the long-term impacts of workplace harassment, civil rights historians who could contextualize the broader patterns of discrimination, and workplace conduct specialists who could dissect the toxic culture that had allowed such behavior to persist. Marcus Holloway's defense team initially attempted to discredit Jamila, digging into her past, searching for any potential weakness. But each attempt backfired spectacularly. Her impeccable professional record, her community involvement, and her clear, articulate presentation made their tactics look desperate and transparently racist. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed a disturbing pattern. Internal emails, intercepted communications, and testimonies from past colleagues painted a damning picture of systematic misconduct. Marcus wasn't just an isolated bad actor. He was a symptom of a much larger problem within the judicial system. Jamila's original civil rights lawsuit, the one she was presenting when the assault occurred, took on new significance. The corporation she was suing found itself under increased scrutiny, with her personal experience becoming a powerful metaphor for the systemic discrimination they were accused of perpetrating. Behind the scenes, political pressure began to mount. Civil rights organizations, media outlets, and progressive legal groups rallied around her case. What had started as a personal fight had become a national conversation about workplace dignity, racial justice, and professional accountability. Her mother, now battling cancer but still fiercely proud, watched the proceedings with a mixture of concern and triumph. She had always told Jamila that true change requires personal sacrifice, that standing up often means standing alone, at least initially. The psychological toll was significant. Jamila found herself navigating complex emotions, anger, vulnerability, determination. She sought therapy, understanding that her fight was as much an internal journey as an external battle. Support groups for professional women of color became her sanctuary, a place where she could process her experiences honestly. As the legal proceedings continued, Jamila became more than just a plaintiff. She was a strategist, a symbol, a voice for those who had been silenced for generations. Her cross-examinations were masterful, her legal arguments razor-sharp. She was transforming her moment of violation into a powerful instrument of justice. The prosecution's attempts to settle quietly were repeatedly rejected. Jamila was clear. This wasn't about money. This was about systemic change, about creating a precedent that would protect future generations of professional women, especially women of color. With each passing week, the momentum shifted. What once seemed like an impossible fight was now a movement, with Jamila Richardson at its center, not as a victim, but as a warrior of justice. The courtroom was packed on the day of the pivotal hearing. Media satellites, civil rights activists, and legal experts filled every available space. Jamila sat composed, her tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the emotional intensity surrounding her case. Marcus Holloway's career was now in tatters. Multiple investigations had uncovered a pattern of misconduct that extended far beyond the single incident with Jamila. Testimonies from past colleagues, particularly women of color who had been silenced before, created a damning narrative of systemic harassment. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A junior prosecutor, inspired by Jamila's courage, came forward with a series of internal communications that revealed a deeply entrenched culture of racial and gender discrimination within the prosecutor's office. What was once whispered in hushed tones was now being documented and presented as evidence. Jamila's original civil rights lawsuit against the corporation took on new dimensions. The assault and subsequent legal battle had exposed broader patterns of institutional racism that extended beyond the courtroom. Shareholders, increasingly concerned about the company's reputation, began to pressure for substantive changes. Her personal transformation was equally profound. The woman who had been slapped in court had evolved into a national figure, a symbol of resilience, dignity, and unyielding pursuit of justice. Speaking engagements, book deals, and opportunities for systemic change began to present themselves. But Jamila was strategic. She wasn't interested in personal fame. Each opportunity was carefully evaluated for its potential to create meaningful change. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting women of color in professional spaces, providing legal support, mentorship, and resources for those facing discrimination. The psychological healing was ongoing. Therapy sessions helped her process the trauma, transforming her pain into purpose. She spoke openly about the emotional journey, destigmatizing the conversation around workplace harassment and mental health. Her mother, though battling her own health challenges, became her strongest supporter. Their conversations were filled with a mixture of historical context and forward-looking hope. They understood that this fight was part of a larger generational struggle for dignity and respect. The legal community watched in a mixture of admiration and trepidation. Jamila was reshaping conversations about professional conduct, accountability, and institutional change. Her approach was neither vengeful nor passive. It was methodical, principled, and profoundly transformative. As the case progressed, it became clear that this was more than a personal victory. It was a watershed moment for civil rights, workplace dignity, and professional conduct. Institutions were being forced to reckon with long-ignored patterns of discrimination. Jamila Richardson had entered the courtroom that day as a talented lawyer. She would leave as a catalyst for systemic change, her single moment of defiance rippling out far beyond the immediate legal battle, inspiring a generation to stand up, speak out, and demand better. The final verdict was more than a legal decision. It was a moment of national reckoning. Marcus Holloway was not only disbarred but faced criminal charges for assault and systematic workplace harassment. The prosecutor's office was mandated to undergo comprehensive reform, with independent oversight and mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. Jamila's lawsuit against the corporation resulted in groundbreaking settlements that went beyond monetary compensation. Structural changes were implemented, including diverse leadership development programs, transparent reporting mechanisms for discrimination, and a complete overhaul of workplace conduct policies. Her foundation became a beacon of hope for professional women of color. Scholarship programs, legal support networks, and mentorship initiatives began transforming individual lives. What had started as a personal fight had blossomed into a movement of empowerment and systemic change. The day of the final hearing was emotionally charged. Jamila's mother, now in remission but still fragile, sat in the front row. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness but of profound pride. She had spent her life fighting for civil rights, and now her daughter was continuing that legacy in her own powerful way. In her victory statement, Jamila was characteristically nuanced. "This isn't about punishment," she told the packed courtroom and national media. "This is about creating spaces of dignity, respect, and true professional equality. Every person deserves to be valued for their skills, their integrity, their humanity. Nothing more, nothing less." The ripple effects were immediate and far-reaching. Other women came forward with their stories, emboldened by Jamila's courage. Law firms, corporations, and institutions began proactively examining their cultures, understanding that change was no longer optional. It was imperative. Her original civil rights lawsuit, the one interrupted by the assault, was successfully concluded. The corporation was required to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination programs and provide significant community reinvestment in marginalized neighborhoods. Jamila didn't stop practicing law. If anything, her commitment to justice became even more refined, more strategic. She began teaching at law schools, sharing not just legal knowledge, but the deeper wisdom of using the law as an instrument of social change. Years later, when young lawyers would ask about her landmark case, Jamila would smile. "It was never just about me," she would say. "It was about every person who has ever been silenced, who has ever been told they don't belong. It was about proving that dignity is not something granted. It's something you claim." The slap in the courtroom had been intended to silence her. Instead, it had unleashed a revolution. As she looked back on that transformative moment, Jamila Richardson knew that true victory wasn't measured in legal settlements or public recognition. It was measured in the lives changed, the systems challenged, and the hope restored. She had fought back, and she had won, not just for herself, but for countless others who would follow.